if I may, with a quick personal aside, sort of chat. I was born. I was raised and born in Soviet Union, and if somebody told me that by the time I'm, after I turn 50 years old, I will be presenting in front of international, multiracial audience that spans across multiple time zones, I would have assumed that I became somebody important, a scientist, an artist, or maybe a statesman. Because back then, right, this type of conversation, this type of presentation required either travel or very expensive satellite time, right? And today, thanks to the technologies that were unimaginable 30 years ago, I am a Microsoft employee who is, I'm pretty much, at the bottom of a, proverbial corporate food chain, right? Able to do what was only possible a generation ago was only possible for a selected few. So these all-inspiring technologies that we use right now empower every person to achieve more by adding their unique qualities and experiences to our collective pool of human progress. And it enriches us individually with opportunity to hear those diverse voices we wouldn't be able to hear before. On the other hand, just like those technologies enable us to reach, wide and far and accomplish more, they also enable malicious activities, attacks that either disrupt or damage, our lives to make them easier. That makes them easier to to implement. And so, as part of this experience, as we expand our abilities of humans to create and execute, we also have this other track where we also safeguard. We also have to spend time safeguarding this to prevent using those fantastic advancements in a way that hurts us, right? And today, so with that in mind, I wanted to talk something about I'm very passionate about, right? Is a zero trust framework, and a specifically part that will help us to keep level field with the attackers, the automation of different tasks and settings that you can do to either prevent or react to attempted breaches or attacks, right? So first we're going to start with just quick overview of what zero trust is, right? As you can see by the definition, right? It has, it's, first of all, zero trust is probably, as you hear, is a big buzzword today, right? Zero trust. We hear it. It's a big corporate thing, and then you look at the definition, right? It also has a lot of other buzzwords like proactive, layers, digital, and state. And I think synergy, for whatever reason, didn't make into this, but give it time, right? Ultimately, if we look at zero trust and try, I'm a technical person, right? I like to understand some specifics, something that is actionable, and can be understood and implemented, right? So if we look at zero trust from that point of view, right, it rests on 3 pillars, right? Pillar number 1, verify explicitly. Pillar number 2, use privileged access. And pillar number 3, assume breach. Like the first 2 pillars are pretty common. Everybody understands it, right? We know that we need to apply. We need to apply. We need to apply. So we need to apply these principles of verify and limit access. I think the idea of limiting access is at least 2 decades old, with firewalls and network segmentations. People have been practicing it for a while. In the last 5-6 years, we added identity to that. We started to add identity to that concept of limiting access, right? We're also now grasping with the concept that the limit access also applies not just to external networks when you create like this little, what I sometimes think as of a fenced parking lot, right? Where you control, you block things from coming outside, but once they're inside, everything's open. Now we're starting to focus that no, we should be treating our internal networks very similarly the way we treat our external networks, because a lot of threats are either coming from insiders or from attacks that are attacks such as whether ransomware or the two biggest ones, ransomware or supply chain attacks that have a way of getting inside the network, right? The pillar of the verify access, right? It's a pretty simple concept, right? We we verify each time somebody's trying to access a resource. We verify, are they should they be able to access it? Are they doing something that they're supposed to be doing, right? And you can, there's several different layers where we can take it, very similarly with networks, right? So those two pillars are fairly commonly used and understood by everybody, right? Right. The one assumed breach that is a little bit vague, right? A lot of people, a lot of people asking me questions, and I myself, to be perfectly honest, initially when I heard about those concepts was what do you mean assume breach, right? How is it? What can we do practically in that respect? And after looking into this, after talking with some of the experts, it turns out that it's a fairly conceptually is a fairly simple simple pillar, right? The idea here is to proactively protect yourself, right? In other words, to have tasks and automations that can detect breach if it occurs in progress, as it occurs, and limit the blast radius, or using known attack patterns and using knowledge of attack patterns and using knowledge of the vulnerabilities, right, to be able to remove potential of that attack, right? To remove even ability to attack a specific resource if we know that specific set of settings is vulnerable, right? And the most important thing is that, and the critical thing is on the bottom, that we do not want to rely. We want to avoid reliance on human beings. In other words, many of you, I'm pretty sure, worked with different security products, right? And a lot of them put together this very nice dashboard of the alerts and what have you. And the next question is, so what do I do now? All right, fine, I have this dashboard. Do I have to have somebody sit and constantly look at it, right? And we all know that in today's reality, it is impractical. Nobody has the funding and staffing to have a large amounts of people to just sit and watch in case something pops up, right? So this is where, to me, and this is once again, automation is for a number of reasons is a subject I'm very passionate about. This is where abilities, those new technical abilities, new technologies that especially come with a public cloud, right, come to help us, come to make that the need for constant defense and threat mitigation easier and more cost effective, right? So turning over to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right? So today, what we have with our products, right, is this ability to follow the thread from the leftmost side, which is DevOps code, to your deployment operations, to all the way to the end user, right? And at each step, at each one of those squares, right? We can take actions, right? We can create automated responses, right? In order to stay ahead of the current threat environment, right? So, and specifically, I will be specifically for Azure, right? Specifically for Azure and Microsoft, so Microsoft Defender, I will be talking today about using an Azure resource called Logic Ops, right? So, why Logic Ops? Why am I suggesting? Why am I looking at Logic Ops and not some, I don't know, Azure Functions, Lambda, any other similar automation tool? There is also something called Azure Automation, if you're familiar with it. There are several reasons, right? Reason number one, right, is that, and those of you who attended a session, I think 2 weeks ago, right, about the Sentinel, right, automation, similar scenarios in Sentinel, are noticing that we are making investment into using Logic Ops in our security products by creating custom triggers that specifically triggers that will specifically react to events in the either Microsoft Defender for Cloud or Sentinel, or potentially any other of our security products, right? So from the standpoint of view of the workload itself, or the resource itself, first of all, Logic Ops, especially consumption, Logic Ops, and we will get into this terminology a little bit later as we walk through our demos, right? They're very cost effective. Essentially, if the Logic Op is doing absolutely nothing, right, it costs you absolutely nothing, right? It is also fairly easy to get started, right? It's the designer of the Logic Op is graphical, right? And you can fairly easy, and I will show you how, right? Start and do some very simple automations, very simple tasks that that will help you accomplish things that either at scale or completely unattended, right? Reason number number two, Logic Ops are fantastic at working with REST APIs, right? The built-in ability to execute HTTP calls, as well as process and read JSON output, makes this work very, very easy. If you were to try something similar with, let's say, PowerShell, you will find process a little bit more, steps and process a little bit more challenging. Number one. Number two, obviously not everybody in the world is a PowerShell expert or Bash scripting expert, and this allows people who may not have a lot of programming experience to get started and then work their way through to advanced features like flow controls, right? Because Azure Logic Ops also have a very rich way of loops, conditions, data formatting, outputs, right? I have, for example, just recently I helped one of the organizations we work with create a Logic Ops that sends vulnerability, sends recommendations found in Microsoft Defender in a CSV file, in a native CSV file, essentially converts JSON output into CSV files and distributes it based on subscription ownership, right? So there's really no limit. Your imagination is pretty much limit of what you can accomplish with a Logic Op, right? On top of it, we have Logic Ops have native connectors that make it very easy to connect to various SaaS and PaaS services. Today we will see an example with Teams, right? But Office 365 sending emails, for instance, or reading or setting data to the SharePoint is also an option, right? On top of it, there are native connectors to SQL Cosmos DB, and other Azure workloads, which allow you to, in some scenarios, if you want to pull additional data or store additional data, they make it very, very easy. And last but not the least, right? Those functions, the logic ops are also fully integrated with Azure Identity Network, which makes authentication process very, very easy. Literally 2 steps, and you can start performing actions with logic ops. Now moving to other clouds, because logic ops fundamentally use HTTP calls, right? All those multi-cloud integrations, right, will also work just as well, right? You simply, if you need to perform action in AWS or Google Cloud, right, you simply use a different API and different authentication model, but you can you can definitely perform the same actions that I demonstrated. The same will be demonstrating the same processes in any cloud, as well as scenarios where you can even do things on premise. I think we have there are examples where you can do something as simple as open a ServiceNow ticket as a if as a result of, let's say, alert popping up. So ultimately, logic ops are this really powerful and yet cost-effective tool that will allow you to operationalize your Microsoft Defender for Cloud in a way that you no longer need to worry, well, what am I doing with those alerts? What am I doing with those recommendations, right? You can set up various sets of actions as needed, right? Right. So what are things that are possible today natively with Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right? First and foremost, right, the ones that you will see, one of the simplest ways, right, is to you can simply go find a recommendation, right, look at it, and then simply run a logic ops that you designed earlier against that recommendation, as you can see in the screenshot, right, to fix that problem, right? On this screenshot, I only have one item, right? But potentially you can have 5, 10, whatever the number is, right? The logic ops have ability to scale, so that if I have, let's say there's a single web function, right? Function. If I had 10 functions, I could still run that same. I could select them all, and let's say trigger logic op, identify the right logic op, and then run it. And I will show you. We will during the demos. You will see how it works, right? So what is a fundamental? Some of the fundamentals of automating logic op to responses? So, usage of managed identity, right? Why you want to use managed identity? Because number one, you no longer, the way managed identities work, right? You don't have to worry about managing any type of credentials, right? We manage it all internally, right? And that managed identity is also going to be associated in this case with the system assigned managed identity. This identity is specifically associated with the specific logic op, right? And when if for whatever reason you need to delete that logic op, the managed identity will be deleted as well. Now you can hypothetically use a user assigned managed identity, which user assigned managed identity is a separate resource, right? And that would be useful in a scenario where you may have multiple logic ops that require the same the same privileges, right? The second part of it. So once we have that managed identity, right, we can use it now to give our logic app ability to perform actions, right? So in my example over here, I just assigned rights and privileges as a tenant root group. You may depending on your organizational needs and security setups, you might be doing it in some different way, right? One thing to be cognizant though, and now I'm talking as a with my sort of as an identity engineer hat, right? One thing you should be cognizant, right? Some of the actions require rather very wide privileges that are pretty wide. So some of those logic apps will need to be treated, should be treated as what we used to call as tier 0 resources. In other words, very tightly controlled and monitored, with it very tightly controlled access and monitor, potentially maybe sitting in the subscriptions that that does not follow general management group flow, right, and is secured in addition to in addition to any, unlike any other subscriptions, right? And on top of it, with some of the permissions, we also have ability to do to do some additional role limitations, where you might be saying, all right, fine, if I'm giving an application ability to be a blob contributor across all of my environment, maybe I just want to give it that limited right, or maybe there will be some of the blobs where I don't want my logic app to touch, based on, let's say, some type of tags, right? So last but not the least, right? Obviously ability to trigger workflow manually is very helpful, right? But our goal is to, what can we do to react to either alert or recommendation pretty much as soon as it shows up, even if it's popping up during what's during in the middle of what are typically not working hours, right? So for that scenario, we have a workflow automation option in Microsoft Defender for Cloud, right, where you can create, and we will walk through that process, right, where we can create a task, right, that will specify specific type of, you can specify whether it's going to be responding to recommendation and alert. You can specify what specific alerts it will address, or maybe everything, right, depending on what you're doing, right? And then you will specify a logic, then you will be able to specify a logic app that that configures that will execute that action. Once you're all set and configured, next time a new recommendation shows up, right, that action will be triggered, that specific workflow automation will be triggered, and the action you selected, whether it's the example we'll be talking is, let's say, disabling a public access to storage accounts, right? It will automatically perform that, clear out that recommendation effectively by putting storage accounts back into default mode that your organization requires. Right, and now the best part, right? Demo. Let's see. Yeah, so let's see if we can have everything run smoothly today. All right, let's start with alerts, right? So I have a malware alert in my storage account. right? And I pre-configured a logic app to react to this alert. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to navigate to this page, right, the security alert page, and with the take action options, right? And I'm going to select trigger logic app, right? And if you see, by default, when we're looking at the reason my logic app popped up right away, because over here by default, right, we have a trigger type security alert selected, and I will explain to you what that means, why it is important, right? So I will click on my logic app over here, right? Right, it should be triggered automation. It will trigger automation, right? And if everything worked out right, one of my users should get a new alert in the Teams, right? Specifying the threat, right? Giving some of the details, such as subscription severity, what the alert is, right? Some specifics where it is located, the name of the blob, link to the details, right? And one of the things potentially we can do is we could even perform some type of an action over here, and Microsoft that using adaptive cards with Microsoft Teams is a slightly different topic, so I'm not gonna dive too deeply into this, but these are these are one of some of the options. So let's just quickly walk through what happened, right? So I created this logic app, right, that fundamentally that is triggered when an alert arrives that has an alert trigger, right? The logic app then goes and verifies that we are actually reacting to the correct alert type, right? Because different alert types will be different, will have different data, and potentially we might want to perform different actions, right? Once we verify that this is a correct alert, right, we're going to get details of the blob using HTTP call, right? And over here what we're doing over here is essentially creating that call by combining outputs from the alert details, right? And building together a correct call, right? Over here we are using authentication information, using managed identity, right? And with very specific audience in this case, right? Once we made that call, when this call is successful, we will get the results, and we will compose the adaptive card that we're going to post to the teams, right? So as you can see, we're pulling data either from the alert itself or from the details of blob to give whoever is going to see this card, a full information about what happened. And last and not the least, we have a connector to the teams where we specify authentication, the team, the channel, and as a result, and all of you seen the result, right? Well, when we triggered this, right, we got this alert, right? So this is an example. This is a a built-in example just to give you idea how things work, right? Let's see if we can try maybe build a logic up from scratch, right? And to see how how easy it is or how hard it is, so you can decide for yourself. Oops. All right. Let's just pretend we're I've never done it before. Right. All right, so we're going to, so because we already started in a resource group, our resource group is going to be repopulated, right? And let's see, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to remove so remove public access storage account, right? So we can leave the region as is, or you can select depending once again, depending on your organization, you might have limits to what type of what regions you're allowed to do, right? So some of the plans may not be available in all regions, but in our case, we're going to select the consumption. Consumption in a production environment, you should definitely enable log analytics. As far as zone redundancy, I'm going to disable it. Disable it for now, but once again, if you're creating a production automations, then I would highly recommend look into this scenario, because this way, even if one of the regions becomes unavailable, you still have your automations, right? So. And hopefully we will be able to create it in a couple of minutes. Right. As a okay, well, we're done. So when you create a logic app, it right away it moves, it brings you over to a to a design area, right? You can, if you wish to use one of the templates, you can simply select security and just use one of the three templates over here, right? In our case, we just want to start. We're going to start with a blank, right? And we're going to search for trigger actions for Defender, right? And they came up. So we are going to create a logic app that will react to the recommendations in this case, right? All right, we're already connected. If sometimes if you're creating this for the first time in your environment, you might be asked to generate connection. It's a click of a button. There's nothing, no additional information, nothing ties you to a specific user, right? So next question is, right, so okay, fine, we created this trigger, right? I'm probably going to need to understand, what data, right? What data I can get out of this, right? What data is available? So what I typically do, I just create a trigger. I just create this logic app with a trigger, right? And then, as part of my development process, and I'm, this is what you can definitely do as you learn and ramp up on your logic apps, right? Let's see. I'm simply going to trigger it, even though I know it's not going to necessarily do anything, right? So we're going to trigger logic up. Yeah. Now over here, you can see that by default, a completely different trigger is selected, right? In the first alert area, the trigger type by default was selected security alerts. So it only showed us logic apps that had security alerts trigger configured. Here we're by default only selecting recommendations, and you will only see recommendations alert triggered, right? So right, let's trigger it, right? And then we can go back to the application and look at the run history, right? And we're going to need to refresh. And so run history would be one of the best ways for you to see and debug information. So the critical piece of data over here for us will be this resource details ID, right? Because what we're going to do here is we're going to use, our goal here is to use with this logic up, our goal here is to call Azure REST API, right, to remove public access on a selected storage account. And how do we pass information which storage account it is by essentially selecting that value resource ID, that resource ID value that was passed to us through the trigger, right? So let's go back and create a managed identity, right? And what we need to do is give that managed identity appropriate rights. So in my case, once again, I'm going to be doing it at tenant root group. You may, your scenario might be might be different, right? So we're going to do, oops. All right, we're going to do storage account contributor because we're going to make changes. We're going to specifically select managed identity in assign access, right? And we're going to select our newly created logic hub. Next. Sorry, apparently I didn't click on the mouse properly. All right. So in our next step, we're going to try to find an HTTP action, right? And then we're going to go and take a quick look at what I usually do, I take a quick look at the Azure REST API spec, right? In this scenario, we want to fix storage account, right? The type of HTTP call is patch, right? So we're going to configure, we're going to add over here patch, right? The URL over here will be we'll start with http://management.azure.com. And if you noticed, I have a pop-up here with the dynamic content, right? So what we want to do over here, we want to, if you look at the actual form, right? If you look at the actual form, we need to supply the rest of the information over here. And this information is stored in a resource ID value that we looked up that we saw earlier, right? So we're going to simply remember that value property resource details ID, right? And then we will add another, we need to add the API information. So this is usually passed, you can pass it either inside the string, but we can just configure it as a query. All right. Right, and now we need to, sorry. So last but not the least is the actual body, the settings that we have to provide, and it's it is typically sent as a JSON. So we need to take a quick look at our at our schema, right, at the request body properties, right, and what it tells over here is that it's a 2-layer property. So what we need to do is set up, sorry. So it's properties. And then, yeah, to save time, I'm just going to copy and paste. I'm sorry, I'm not that good of a typist. Right, and last but not the least is authentication. Right, we are going to be using managed identity. Right, and the audience for this will be right, and we can also rename it. There's a very easy way to rename your functions nowadays. And we're going to save this, right? And now let's see if it works, right? Let's just, check. So right now, see, allow public access is enabled, right? So we're going to select both of these accounts, all right? And we're going to trigger our logic up, right? And see over here, because we had 2 accounts, we triggered 2 instances, all right? Let's check our run history, and we failed. Well, I guess our role assignment didn't take. Let's try again. All right, then looks like as if we were. Let's try again. I think I clicked on the wrong button. That's what it is. Sorry, that's the nature of demos. Storage account contributor, managed identity. All right, let's try one more time. All right, so we're going to have to wait until. Firstly, we're going to have to wait until permissions are
Mike,
propagated.
We have some comments here saying
sure.
that you didn't paste the right value for the API.
That is correct. Excellent. Great call. Thank you. So we're going to. All right, let's take a look. So we're debugging in real time live here. Real time here. All right, Let's just make sure that I fixed. Yep. All right. So we got this extra forward slash that we just fixed. All right. I guess third time should be charm. Okay. And we still failed. All right.
Mike, your query is saying API version equals API version, not the date.
Oh, thank you. It's a copy and paste error. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. One more time. This time it should work. Oh, yes. So now that thank you very much again for the help with API with copy and paste error. So now, as you can see, right, we're set the allow public access is set to disabled, right, and you know we were able to programmatically fix several different several impacted storage accounts, right. So obviously this is, you know, what we showed you right now is pretty manual process, right? I don't know if we still have time, right? I'll try to do this quick. This is a pretty manual process, right? Which, you know, if you have to create a separate if you have to create a separate you know, logic up by hand for every single instance, this is going to take a little while. Plus, on top of it, if you remember, in my original logic up, I also had some series of checks to make sure that the logic up is acting on a correct alert, right? And if you have to build it from scratch every time, this is going to be a little bit painful, right? So the options that you have in this scenario is ability to use built-in infrastructure as a code. Once again, this is public cloud, and part of being in a public cloud is this ability to deploy things programmatically, consistently, time after time. You know, generally saving you from a lot of manual work, right? And with that, right now, I would like to introduce if you're not aware, there's a wonderful GitHub repo called Microsoft Defender for Cloud, our public repo. And in this repo, we have a number of different workload automations that are designed for most common cases, right? Can be executed end to end with just some slight customizations, right? And we can so you can I would highly encourage you to explore it and start using this repository in your daily life. And because it's a public repository, if you believe you have something to contribute, definitely definitely fork it, and then definitely do a pull, right, and then submit, and then send your submissions for our review, and we will add them as needed. So do I still have time for one quick demo?
Yeah, yes, we have time.
Okay, fantastic. So with this in mind, so first of all, I myself created a little template, right? This is every time I start working on some type of logical, some type of automation from Microsoft Defender, right? I created this template that that creates a connector, and then it creates a base logic op with the creates a base logic op with the with some of the checks, right? It does some of the conditional checks, making sure that we're acting on the right recommendation, right? So it includes that logic, so I don't have to build it from scratch, right? And and it can be deployed. It can be deployed ahead of time, right? You can let's see, this is this visible, or should I make it a little bit bigger? Try to make it a little bit bigger.
That looks good.
All right. So, and it is fairly easy to deploy, right? It's a pretty much you can do it with a single and by the way, this template is available publicly in my repository, and when we're going to post after this call, we're going to post some of the links, right? So you can play with it yourself. Okay. Sorry, once again, I'm not a very good typist, so I'm relying a lot on copy and paste. And let's see. So let's see what happens. This is what happens when you yeah, no, we're on correct subscription. All right, so since we have a parameter for a workflow name and I didn't put it over here, I'm going to type it here. So this is going to be our version 2. And and I am not having a very good luck today. I just delete this. All right, you know what? I'm gonna save time, and I'm just gonna show you another method, another way you can deploy from our from the one other way you can deploy workflow automations is from directly from the GitHub, right? And I'm going to pick. Let's see which one. Where is it? This one, isolate, and it still has an old name, so it eventually somebody will rename it. Will rename it to the Microsoft Defender. So please ignore this. But so this is fairly simple. All you need to do here is just click on the button, deploy to Azure. All right, we'll select a resource group. All right, and let's see if it will let us create it this time. Might take a little time for it to. All right, so we just created our logic up, right? And what we can do next, right? Once again, remember manually triggering logic up is very helpful and useful, right? But what we really want to do, we want to automate this, right? And the way is make it fully automated, right? And the way we will do it is through our workflow automation, right? And we'll just simply create a new workflow. Right, we will call it isolate VM, right? We'll store it in our resource group, right? We'll say the alert will have alert name will contain VM or virtual machine, and we'll only generate for something like this. We'll do if we're going to isolate a VM, we're going to do something right. We're only going to do something drastic like this for the for the critical workloads, right? And then I'm just clicking create, and once it's misspelled and has a white space. All right, there we go. And so now if we create a matching alert, if we have a matching alert that will require you to take a drastic action, you no longer have to be present, right? It will it will automatically execute, isolate this VM, and then send notifications to all appropriate people. All right. And that's, pretty much all I had for today. If we have any, if we have any questions, I'll be happy to, questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer them.
So the Q&A team has been great at answering questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting lots of thank yous and great sessions and very informatives in the chat. So good job.
Mm-hmm.
And we have even a best session I've been on. So good job, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you, Mike, for being our guest today and for an excellent presentation. And thank you to the rest of the team who helped answer questions. Once again, I would like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements is to visit our landing page at aka.ms/security-community. And while there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. A good start would be browsing our bite-sized product videos, ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars. Please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. Thank you and see you next time. Goodbye.